The Prusa Mark IV arrived and I am excited to get it unboxed. I wasn't expecting this for another couple of days, so it is certainly a pleasant surprise. It does feel a little bit funny that I pre-ordered a Prusa XL almost a year and a half ago, and I'm getting something I ordered a few days ago before I get that printer. But nevertheless, I am excited to see it and to get it unboxed. There are lots of printers on the market in 2023 that can compete with the likes of the Prusa Mark IV. So they have high expectations, and we're gonna see if it lives up to those expectations. First thing I'm seeing is this really nice graphic of the Extruder. It's kind of an assembly diagram that's been blown up and expanded so you can see all of the various components. I think that's pretty cool, and that's definitely not something you would see on a closed source machine, since this is kind of the bread and butter of the engineering behind the Extruder. So as we move through the unboxing here, first thing I'm seeing is some manuals, pretty standard. Thank you for purchasing the original Prusa Mark IV. Your support allows us to invest in further development of open source 3D printers and other 3D printing innovations, including the Prusa Slicer software, our high quality Prusa materials, and the printables.com community platform. Okay, so that's interesting, and I do agree with them on Prusa Slicer and printables.com. Those are both fantastic contributions to the open source community. However, I would argue that Prusa is self-serving and it's just there to make them profit. It is great filament, don't get me wrong, but I don't really understand how that contributes to the open source community, unless they made their filament production mechanisms open source, which I'm not sure. If you know, let us know down in the comments. But certainly Prusa Slicer is a fantastic contribution to open source. And in fact, Bamboo themselves benefit from it because their Bamboo Studio Slicer is built on the backbone of Prusa Slicer. So we all benefit by that being open source. Okay, so I'm seeing some manuals and some stickers here. We do have some revamped stickers, which is pretty nice. This one's kind of funny, it says not for resin. I think that's kind of ironic if you were to put that on your FDM 3D printer. We also have the classic 3D printing handbook in full color. I never really read this, to be honest, but there is a lot that's new about the Prusa Mark IV that I'm going to have to relearn. Things as simple as setting the idler tension are going to be different on the new Extruder. And I think there's going to be a lot of menu systems that we're not familiar with, and there's going to be a bit of a learning curve even if you have owned a Prusa printer before. Next thing I'm seeing is the receipt indicating that they've done their quality control checks. What I'm not seeing here is a graph showing it getting up to temperature. That was always a staple of this checklist on the Prusa Mark III, was just a plot, temperature versus time, showing it actually getting up to temperature. So obviously they've done away with that, but they've added some new checks to ensure quality of the printer before they ship it out. So I see the load cell is being checked, the LCD panel, the USB port, all sorts of different things that they are checking. So you can't knock them for their quality control. They certainly do a great job of that. That's one of the things that you know is going to be good with a Prusa printer, is the quality control. You know you're going to get a working machine out of the box. Next thing I'm seeing is a power cable, North American plug for me, and of course we have the Haribo gummy bears. These are the pocket size. I would have liked to have seen a full-size bag of gummy bears because I do like them. Hopefully with the Prusa XL we get at least a standard size, if not a sharing size. Now this is the fully assembled Prusa Mark IV. The kits were not available for purchase at the time of me purchasing this machine. I wanted to get this as soon as possible, and currently they only have the fully assembled versions. So this was $10.99 US, plus I think $135 US in shipping. And then upon import to my country, which is Canada, I did have to pay taxes. I know Prusa does include their VAT tax in the price if you're buying from the EU, but unfortunately for me, I have to pay the price that you see on the website plus tax upon import. So it does end up being quite a pricey machine. It's about 1900 Canadian, which I think is about maybe 1600 US. So I'm seeing a roll of Prusa filament, which is great. The Mark III used to come with some off-brand filament, at least the last time I bought it. Didn't look like it was manufactured by Prusa, and I think that was prior to them actually having their own filament production. But they've since brought it in-house, and now we have a nice high quality roll of Prusa filament in Galaxy Black, which is a fantastic color. Then we have a box of accessories. So another thing that Prusa does really, really well is their documentation. So you can see a QR code here on the front of this box. Presumably we can scan that and figure out exactly what's inside and what all of those various things do. So as I open the box here, I'm seeing a bunch of little baggies. Again, they're all labeled very nicely with QR codes. So we have our lubricant and some cleaning accessories, some IPA and a needle for cleaning the nozzle. We have the spool holder. The spool holder looks to be identical to the Mark III. Then we have a bag of tools, some wrenches, nose pliers, and a screwdriver. The one thing I'm not seeing in here that we used to get with the Mark III is a glue stick. I guess now with the always perfect first layer, maybe they think that you don't need glue stick. I think if you were printing with ABS, it's still going to require some glue stick, so it's a bit of a shame that they didn't send it. Nevertheless, we do have some other things that we didn't used to get. So we have a filament guide. So I think that's going to work in tandem with the spool holder to just keep the filament on the roll and keep it from coming untangled, which can definitely happen if you have a very full roll. So this is a printed part filament guide, and then we have some hardware to go along with it. And again, there's QR codes on all of these bags that would tell us what these things do and how to put them together. Then we have a USB flash drive. So the Prusa Mark IV uses USB as opposed to an SD card. And moving on, we have the printer itself as the final thing to come out of this box. So here it is, the Prusa Mark IV out of the box, and there's still a little bit of foam to come off, so we'll go ahead and pull that off. I am seeing the classic Prusa test print on the bed, although it has been revamped. It is a different geometry than we're used to seeing, and it looks like they've made it a little bit more functional. So we see that they've kind of turned it into a keychain, and there's a hole in the O. So yeah, maybe you want to put that on your keychain, maybe you want to toss it in the bin, but nevertheless, at least we've seen that they have tested this printer. On the build surface, I'm seeing smooth PEI. Personally, I like the satin sheet that Prusa makes. I think it's the best all-round sheet. Works for PLA, works for PETG, and can work for ABS with some glue stick. Although for ABS, I would probably stick with the smooth sheet with glue stick. Fortunately, we can replace this sheet with any of the sheets from our Mark III because they are interchangeable. So they've redone the graphic on the sheet. They've added a QR code, which seems to be a theme here. And now it says Mark IV instead of Mark III. Overall, it looks very much like the Mark III. Obviously, the footprint is the same. The build height is a little bit taller, but the printer itself, I believe, is the same height. I think you just have more clearance with an extruder than you did with the old Mark III extruder. It looks very familiar. There are obviously a few differences, things that they've upgraded, things that they've changed. Most of the parts have been revamped in some way, either reinforced or completely redesigned. So it looks pretty sturdy. It looks like a hefty Mark III or kind of a chunky Mark III. On the back, I can see that there is a new kind of honeycomb shape here. I believe that they said that this is kind of an engineering decision and this would actually kind of reinforce the frame somehow. It also just looks kind of cool. And I can imagine some folks designing accessories or add-ons that would actually fit into these honeycomb shapes. Although they are pretty shallow up top, the ones down the sides are a little bit deeper and those might be a little bit more functional. Okay, turning the printer back around, we are looking at the Extruder. This is one of the heavily advertised features of this printer. It has been completely redesigned and improved in all sorts of different ways. There is now a thermistor in here at the heat break to detect heat creep. There's a swivel fan, which I think is pretty cool. And this will make it really easy to do nozzle changes. In addition to the fact that we now have a quick swap nozzle, similar to the E3D Revo, we can unplug a few connectors and then pull the nozzle and the heat break right out. And it should be very easy to do nozzle changes. I don't see the PCB that they showed in their demo. I assume it's probably hidden behind this plastic part, but that PCB will make quick swaps, very, very easy, because you can unplug things upstream versus taking them all the way back to the motherboard, as in the case of the Mark III. I must say the overall aesthetic is a little bit dated, in my opinion, just to kind of be frank about it. I think it looks a little bit chunky. It doesn't look super futuristic. Of course, we still have all printed components, which for the most part is fine. We do have a nice graphic on the front here. This is also a printed component, so they've done some sort of screen printing on the printed plastic, which is pretty cool, and I would love to know how they did that. It would have been interesting here to see this actually printed on a Prusa MMU. Since all of the parts are printed on Prusa printers, why not take it the extra step and actually make that a multi-material print? Next thing I'm seeing is the new LCD screen. So this is unfortunately not a touch screen, it's still controlled by the rotary encoder knob, but we do have a lot more real estate than the old graphic LCDs that we had on the Prusa Mark IIIs. So even though this looks a lot like the Mark III at face value, it's pretty clear that almost everything has been redesigned in some way. If we look underneath here, you can see that the whole Y carriage has been completely redesigned. Lots of changes kind of behind the scenes that aren't super obvious. For instance, the new 0.9 degree stepper motors and new motherboard that's hidden beneath this case here, new 32-bit motherboard. We also have Wi-Fi on board and Ethernet. I think the addition of Ethernet was a nice touch. The one thing we don't have on the Prusa Mark IV is an accelerometer. So we have a very similar Extruder setup as we've seen on the Prusa XL. The Prusa XL has an accelerometer chip on the Extruder PCB, but the Prusa Mark IV does not. I personally would have liked to have seen that so we could recalculate the resonances whenever we move the printer to a new environment with different vibrations, or just over time as the belt tension changes, it might be nice to actually recalculate the resonances. However, one thing that is worth noting is that this is a Cartesian setup with a very short belt path, and a big contributing factor to the resonances is the elasticity in the belts. So on a Core XY printer like the Prusa XL, the belt path being so much longer is going to contribute to those vibrations, and therefore the accelerometer being integrated is more necessary than on this Cartesian Prusa Mark IV. All right, so now I think we're ready to get this thing plugged in and turned on. I'm gonna run my first test print on the Prusa Mark IV, and I would hope that we could print a 20-minute benchy. However, as I understand it, the firmware that this is shipped with does not have input shaping enabled, which is supposed to be one of the flagship features of the Prusa Mark IV. So we may need to wait until they issue a firmware update in order to actually print a 20-minute benchy, but we'll see just how fast it is out of the box with the improved hardware and not the improved firmware. So the machine is booting up, and I'm seeing full color graphics on the LCD, but again, it is not touch, so we cannot navigate that way. We will need to use this encoder knob. I did briefly see an LED come on, which is the status LED. I think it will come back on during printing. So the first thing I'm going to do is load filament. I think one of the best innovations on the Prusa Mark IV is the redesigned extruder. We have a cycloidal 8-to-1 gearbox, which sounds like really fancy engineering, and I'm sure it is. But in essence, what that's going to allow us to do is push filament with a lot more force. So presumably the max volumetric flow rate on the Prusa Mark IV extruder will be higher than that on the Mark III. Also, the heater block looks marginally bigger. It's definitely a different form factor, so maybe it will be able to melt filament faster. It did take a little bit of time to get up to temperature, so not super quick in heating. So not sure what watt heater cartridge is in there. Most likely a 40 watt like on the Mark III, but that is to be determined. Okay, so we've inserted the USB key into the printer. Now we're gonna see what kind of test prints are on the USB. We have an alpaca. So there's quite a long wait time to actually load the thumbnail after you click into the file. It's not very responsive. So I'm not seeing a benchy on the USB key, which I find to be disappointing. Even if it wasn't a 20-minute benchy, I'd be happy with a 30-minute benchy, or really anything quicker than the Mark III, which is roughly an hour and a half. So there's no benchy, which is unfortunate. We can obviously slice our own, but for now we're gonna have to go with one of the test prints that is on the USB. So immediately I can see that the feed rate for the motion is a lot quicker. It is moving quite quickly as compared to the Prusa Mark III. I also noticed that they've cut down some time because some of the travel moves during these initial calibrations, they do 2-axis motion. So they move in X and Y simultaneously as opposed to a pure X move and then a pure Y move. So that just cuts down a little bit of time. We also have the status light that is turned on. It is blue. I assume those are color coded based on the status of the printer. Blue is probably printing and it's likely going to go green when the print is complete. Okay, so we are up and running with our first test print on the Prusa Mark IV. It is noticeably quicker than the Mark III. Is it quieter? I don't know. Honestly, it is quite loud. I don't know if you guys can hear this. This table resonates a lot, so this is going to impact the noise level. But let me just hold my mic close to the machine for a quick minute. Hopefully I don't blow your eardrums while you hear how loud the Prusa Mark IV is. If you're comparing the Prusa Mark IV against the Bambu Lab X1 Carbon, one of the main things that you might pick up on is the noise level. Prusa has advertised this machine as being silent. So if you operate a 3D printer in an apartment or an environment where noise is sensitive, that may be reason enough alone to get a Mark IV over an X1 Carbon. However, as I am printing with this, I am noticing that it is still fairly loud. Is it as loud as an X1 Carbon? No, those things are crazy loud. Is this quiet? Would I want to sleep next to it? I don't think so. So we have access system menus during printing here, so we can change things like nozzle temperature, we can change the bed temperature, the fan speed, the flow, we can change a few different things. There's also some diagnostics in the info menu, which are pretty cool and things that we wouldn't have seen previously. So you can see that the heat break temperature is hovering at 32 degrees. The other thing I'm seeing on the LCD is a load cell value. So we do have a load cell that is used for homing and bed meshing, but we could also use that potentially to detect filament clogs or other abnormalities in the extrusion. Anytime there is a spike in the reading from the load cell, that means there's added resistance in the filament path. I don't think there's anything enabled in the firmware right now as far as that's concerned, but it could be on the roadmap and it could be used with the existing hardware. All right, there we have it. The very first print off the Prusa Mark IV. So it did go fairly quick, but not lightning speed by any means. The one thing I am observing is that the purge line is printed right below the part. So that seems different than we've seen before, where the purge line would usually be outside the build area. Overall, the print quality looks really nice. Filament is fantastic filament and it tends to look good, but of course you do need a good printer as well. So that's it for this video, the introduction to the Prusa Mark IV. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you get subscribed and stay tuned for a full review of this printer. My name's Taylor, this is YGK3D. Until next time, happy 3D printing.